Welcome to another challenge video. In the last challenge video, we completed Cyberpunk using only grenades. If you want to know the results of that, go watch it on my channel. This time around, we will do a challenge in Starfield. What's the challenge? Well, it involves the cutter. I want to know, can you beat Starfield using only the cutter? What is the cutter? The cutter is a tool used for mining resources. The cutter is the first item you receive in the game, and we can do a little bit of damage with it. So that is good enough to make it a challenge. And on top of all this, we're going to do the challenge on the hardest difficulty. Very hard. Quick rules for this challenge. I can only kill with the cutter. I can't use any other weapon. Powers are allowed as long as they only support and don't kill or damage the enemies. Ship battles are allowed if the game forces you, and it must be completed on the hardest difficulty. This video will probably have spoilers of the main story of Starfield. You have been warned. Let's start the challenge. We've all seen the beginning of the game. We see the Bethesda logo and then the game logo. The game starts with us riding the elevator in a mining facility. We meet Lynn and Heller, our new best friends. I actually forgot to change the difficulty, so I just changed it right here. And we will make our way deeper into the mine. For this challenge, I'm mainly going to focus on the main story because the challenge ends when we beat the game. Lynn will tell us to grab a cutter from the cutter crate. This is officially the first item we get in the game. As you can see, this is one of the worst weapons of the game. It has a base energy damage of 4, limited range of 3, and has 0 mod slots, so there isn't upgrades for it, and the fire rate is decent. I should also mention, when I started this challenge I hadn't completed the main story. Now we're going to put the cutter to use by mining ores. This is what the cutter was meant for. I guess the cutter is like using the pick in Skyrim. The pick can be used as a weapon, but it is a tool for mining. Lynn tells us to go deeper in the mine and collect the thing we are here for. We see a vision and we pass out. This brings us to the character creation. I'm going to select the preset and just slightly modify it. I probably won't use this character ever again. Here's my character. Now we need to choose a background. I wasn't sure which background I wanted. I was stuck between xenobiologist and explorer. Both of them have lasers and surveying. I basically had to choose if I wanted more oxygen or astrodynamics, which makes your graph drive better. I chose xenobiologist. For traits, I chose extrovert because I planned on having a companion. My plan was for them to do all of the work. Taskmaster to make crew members better. And terra firma because I find myself spending more time on the ground. The traits won't really help us though. And finally, naming the character. His name will be Cutter. Very fitting, I know. Time to walk outside and see the world. We end up meeting Barrett, and during the conversation we get attacked. This is the very first combat encounter of the game. Luckily we already have a cutter. I rushed to the ship to get as many hits as I could. This fight is not difficult at all, probably because all the NPC miners are helping you, and the enemies are really low level. As you can see, the cutter has a base damage of 4, but in game it only does 1 or 2 damage. But because of its high fire rate, that 1 or 2 damage adds up. Next, Barry gives us a ship and we take off. This part is the space and ship tutorial. You do fight enemies in this section, but like I said, the game forces you to use your ship in this section. I can't use a cutter even if I wanted to. So this doesn't count as a challenge failed. After killing those enemies, we make our way to the planet of Crete. I did some surveying to get XP and killed some of the wildlife. Also to get more XP, we are going to need it for perks later on. The inside of the facility wasn't difficult. All I had to do was take one enemy at a time. The enemies using melee would get a couple of hits on me, but it wasn't enough to kill me. In this type of challenge, we're going to need a lot of med packs, and you need to save before each combat encounter, just in case you die. At this point, I leveled up and got my first perk point. I knew I had to invest in the lasers perk because this will increase the damage of all laser weapons, including the cutter. Outside the facility, we meet with Brogan. I tried to convince him to leave Barrett alone, but it failed. The first thing I do is run out of there. I was hoping Vasco would kill them all, but he didn't, so I had to go back down and try to kill them myself. This fight was slightly harder than the previous fights, but I just had to take it slow and take a lot of cover. I waited for the enemies to come to me, since the cutter has pretty bad range. I did kill all the enemies without dying. There are a few new enemies outside on the bottom level of the facility, but I just fast traveled to my ship and skipped the whole combat encounter. The next part of the game, we arrive in New Atlantis. There isn't any enemies in New Atlantis, so there wasn't any combat. I just sold my loot and met with Constellation. Constellation tells us about the artifacts and wants us to collect more. Sarah becomes my follower, and I do take the Mark 1 spacesuit using the mannequin exploit. This is one of the best armors you can get early on in the game. With this, we won't need to worry about armor or defensive perks for a couple levels. I also got the medicine perk, so that our med packs give additional health. This will avoid wasting health packs, especially early on when you are using a lot of med packs. We learned that we need to make our way to Sidonia in Mars. Before leaving, I did take a nap to earn more XP. We are going to need a lot more perks later on. I also got the commerce perk. This perk will give us more money when selling and buying is cheaper. With this build, we're going to be selling and buying a lot, mostly med packs. So far it's not too difficult, but I believe it will get more difficult later on. Arriving at Sidonia, we need to talk to the bartender. He was our only lead for the next part of the mission. He wanted us to pay the guy's tab. By using Sarah's speech check, we brought the tab down to 1,000 credits. And that's 1,000 credits I don't want to spend. So I tried to persuade him to just give us the information. Persuasion didn't work. I talked to different people in the bar, hoping that someone could give us the information we needed. Nobody gave me information, so I just paid the 1,000 credits. This information will send us to the planet of Venus. At Venus, we run into the Varun Zealots, so we need to avoid them and get to the satellite beacon next to them. This is not too hard. We just need to lower our shields, weapons, and engine, and we just wait. And wait. And wait. Until we get to the satellite. I got to the satellite, charged up the grav drive, and set the course for the next destination. But I got a message. You cannot fast travel during combat. Apparently enemies will detect you by charging up your grav drive. The zealots quickly took me out. And that's not the worst part. The worst part is that my last save was when I arrived in Sidonia. So I had to do that whole thing again. This time my persuasion check was successful. So I got the information for free this time. I'm back with the zealots trying to get to the satellite. From the satellite, we learn about the Nova Star Yard. This section of the game was exactly the same as Crete. I took it slow and only faced one enemy at a time. The good thing about the cutter is that every hit gives a chance of staggering the enemy. So during that time, they won't shoot you back and you continue to do damage. I did die once because of a second enemy surprising me. And these enemies deal slightly more damage than the enemies on Crete. I continued deeper into the dungeon, taking it slow, looting enemies, using lots of med packs, and quick saving often. Food this early on in the game is really useful because it avoids using med packs. The last room of the dungeon was slightly more difficult because the enemies are spread out and the cutter has very little range. I decided to go through the back and attack the enemies from the back, but the enemies do run away and take cover. As you can see, the cutter has terrible range. I did die a couple of times in this section, but eventually I was able to clear the room by doing my same strategy, killing one enemy at a time. The secret to the cutter is to kill enemies one at a time. For the next part of the mission, we need to go to Neptune. Here we get attacked by Mora's ship. This is another space battle forced by the game. After weakening the ship, I was able to board it. The interior of the ships are small, so killing enemies one at a time is easy to do. We talked with Mora and he gives us the next artifact. The next mission makes us go check up on Barrett. Lynn tells us that pirates came back and kidnapped Heller and Barrett. We need to save them, but before we go, you can actually get Heller's cutter, which has the same stats as the regular cutter, but can also deal 20% more damage against robots. I guess this is the only upgrade you can get for the cutter. I saved Heller first. He tells us where we can find Barrett. He is in this station that is filled with pirates. Once again, I had issues with the range of the cutter, and I died a couple of times in this section. I tried taking different approaches, but I kept dying. I finally gave up and just ran inside the building, and it actually worked. It's now time to save Barrett. I took some alcohol to increase my persuasion. I'm hoping to do this without any fighting. My persuasion actually worked, and I was able to walk away without any fighting. But I still have to deal with the enemies outside that I left. Actually, I don't. When I walked outside, all the enemies despawned. So I just went around peacefully looting everything. I returned to the lodge, talked with Sam Coe. Sam says he knows where to find an artifact back in his home planet. Sam is waiting for us at Aquila City. We need to go to the bank, but the bank is in the middle of a bank robbery. I was able to avoid conflict through persuasion. I'm starting to see that you can avoid many combat confrontations through persuasion checks. This is the reason why I got perks for persuasion. We receive a map for the next artifact, but it is filled with hostiles. I can't hurt them because the cutter has no range. The enemies just stay back behind cover. I tried running towards them and tried to kill them, but I took a lot of damage. So I gave up and just ran into the cave. Same strategy I took with Barret. Once inside, I created a quick save, but all the enemies followed me inside. I only see one area to run, but right next to it is a giant gas tank that explodes every single time. The shotgun killed me a couple of times. I had to run deeper into the cave and just wait for the enemies to come to me. And back to my strategy of killing one enemy at a time. Grabbed the artifact and headed to the exit. We were met with Shaw herself. I approached slowly. I was not ready for this fight. Luckily, I was able to convince her to let me walk away. I got so lucky with that speech check. For the next mission, we go to the Eye, talk with Vladimir, and he sends us to help his friend Andreja. Andreja was in the middle of looking for the next artifact, so she joins us in clearing the cave. These enemies had a lot of health, but they weren't more difficult. They just took longer to kill. The good thing about this part is that we have 2 companions with us. At the end of the cave, we get the artifact. The next artifact didn't have any enemies. It's just a maze you need to figure out. I actually chose the correct path my first try. Getting this artifact took less than 10 minutes. Easiest mission in Starfield so far. We return to the Eye to talk to Vladimir. Tells us he found an anomaly, so we go and check it out. On this planet, I did kill some of the wildlife for extra XP. And we find the temple that gives us powers. Now we join Walter Stroud to Neon City where we will buy the next artifact. We go to the secret meeting to buy the artifact. We make a deal to get the artifact. And on the way out, a Slayton agent meets us and we find out the artifact was stolen. I tried a persuasion check to avoid confrontation and it fails. This was a fairly easy fight. For some reason, the agent just went into a random corner and trapped himself. But Slayton is not happy with us, so Walter's wife tells us to visit Slayton and come to an agreement. My persuasion check failed at the reception desk, so I had to sneak my way into Slayton's office. There isn't any gunfights until we get to the roof. This section's not too bad. Yes, the cutter has horrible range, but we do have 2 companions that we can use as a distraction. We meet with Nicholas, and I'm not sure what happened here, but he let us go. He also captured the seller, and we have to decide his fate. I decide to let him go because he didn't wrong us. His problem is with Nicholas, not us. I'm starting to notice there isn't very many combat encounters in the main story of this game, and most of the combat can be avoided with persuasion checks. I'm not the type of person that reloads a save if something goes wrong. If something goes wrong, I just go with it and see what happens. I only reload my save if there's a glitch or if I'm stuck in a loop. The next combat encounter is on the planet Procyon, where we visit a deserted robotics lab. I follow my same strategy of killing enemies one at a time. If the enemies were too far away, I just ran towards them to get closer. The last section of the dungeon was slightly more difficult, but I would just run away, use a med pack, then come back, and repeated that until all the enemies died. On my way to the artifact, a Starborn spawned, and this guy was dealing a lot of damage, and he was a tanky enemy. I used the anti-gravity power to knock him down, but he still had a lot of health. I grabbed the artifact hoping to make the Starborn despawn, but it didn't work. I could have left, but I decided to stay and kill the Starborn to see what would happen and to get a lot of XP. The trick to killing Starborns is to use anti-gravity and take a lot of cover. Killing a Starborn will give you 1 quantum essence, which increases the recharge rate of your powers. The next artifact didn't have any enemies. Another Starborn spawned at the artifact. I used my same strategy of using anti-gravity and taking a lot of cover. This was another short 10-minute quest. For the next mission, we need to go talk to Petrov. He is a collector of oddities and we need to buy the artifact from him. He says the artifact is not for sale and we need to steal it from him. I tried to do the bucket exploit. I did get a bounty for picking up the trash can though, which is new for a Bethesda game. Normally, you only get a bounty if you put it in your inventory, but I continued. The exploit didn't work, at least not in this section of the game. I did try to take the artifact in different ways, but none of them worked. No matter what I did, it always resulted in getting a bounty and having the crew attack you. I did learn something. If you run all the way to the end, the crew in the second half of the ship don't attack you. They ignore you for a few seconds, then they attack you. And if you leave without the second half of the crew hostile, the ships won't attack you when you leave. My only option was to steal the artifact. I went to a civilian outpost to clear my bounty, then back to the lodge to add the artifact. This is the part when Starborn attacks the Eye. You're given the option to go save the Constellation members at the Eye or stay at the lodge and defend it. I decided to go to the Eye to avoid combat. If you already played through the main story, you know what happens. Now we need to find Noel with all the artifacts. We get attacked by the hunter and the other Starborns. I started fighting the Starborns, but after a while I noticed they were not getting any damage, so I just ran towards an whale. I think that's what you're supposed to do anyways. We get to the ship and take off. Once again, there are a lot of moments in the main story where you don't even need a weapon. Next is a big chunk of the game where we just talk to various NPCs to get more clues for the next artifact and to learn more about the artifacts themselves. So during this whole section, there isn't any combat. Eventually we arrive at Earth where we learn more about the artifacts, and about halfway into the facility, there is a room with a robot and turrets. I did die once because the robot caught me off guard, so I decided to take the robot out first. I waited for the robot to come to me. I noticed he doesn't follow you out the main entrance, so I used that to my advantage. And for the turrets, I just killed one at a time. And on the way out, you get attacked by multiple Starborns. I did my same strategy of using anti-gravity and taking cover. To be honest, Sarah did most of the work here. These guys were very tanky. At this point, I was mainly focusing on increasing my defense. I got the wellness perk, pain tolerance, and energy weapon dissipation. These perks are a must since the cutter doesn't do a lot of damage. Defense is a little more important here. In the last room, you face 2 Starborns. I couldn't beat these guys. They kept killing me. So I just walked away and exited the facility. I went ahead to the next mission. I killed some wildlife for the lasers perk challenge and found another temple. When you complete a temple, you are teleported outside and a Starborn will spawn. I started to use my strategy of using anti-gravity, but he took me out in a few shots. I tried to fight him again, but he was doing so much damage I just ran away to my ship. That Starborn was too strong and my companion wasn't even there. I actually went back to fight him with Andreja, but he wasn't there. I guess the Starborn despawns once you leave. We need to get another artifact. The entrance is filled with enemies and turrets. I used Andreja as a distraction and I went around the outside of the facility, taking out enemies one by one. The actual facility wasn't difficult. You just need to take it slow and kill one enemy at a time, get the artifact, and kill the Starborn using anti-gravity. We are told to go to Freya 3 for the next artifact. On our way there, we received a distress call, so I go and investigate. This mission is very linear and it's more story focused. There isn't any human enemies. You fight wildlife and robots. This mission was kind of difficult. The wildlife had a decent amount of health and they would deal a ton of damage. And the robots didn't do too much damage. The problem with the robots was there was multiple robots and turrets shooting you at the same time, and that made it difficult. In this mission, you teleport between 2 different universes. For a lot of sections of this mission, I would just run away into the next universe to avoid enemies. At first, I would clear the enemies in the room, but it kept getting harder. I found that with the wildlife, it was easier to kill them one by one and keeping your distance. At tip range of the cutter, they wouldn't attack you. Most of the time, they would stay back and start throwing stuff at you. That made it easier to kill them, but later on, you start seeing more and more in groups. I think there is an easy way to kill the wildlife, but I wasn't able to get the persuasion check for the guard to tell me how to beat them. You can also turn off the robots. I didn't look for the terminals because I was just running from room to room. I did find 2 of the terminals, but they were locked at expert level, and I don't have any perks in lockpicking. This mission with the cutter is very difficult. I also died a couple of times throughout the whole mission. Next is the Battle of Masada 3. When we arrive, the hunter and the emissary are waiting for us. They both will attack you unless you decide to ally with one of them. This is my first time playing the main story this far, so I didn't think I would need to fight both of them in the end. As soon as the fight started, they did a ton of damage. I still have the starter ship with no ship perks. They are also a higher level than myself. I tried fighting them, but my weapons were not doing any damage. I kept dying. And dying. And dying. And dying. I tried approaching this in many ways and I just kept dying. This ship battle on very hard is impossible to complete. I gave up and left. I cannot beat them at this level. I need to level up, get piloting perks, and get a better ship. I would say this counts as the game forcing you to kill enemies with a ship. I don't think you can do this battle with a starting ship on very hard. I left and did a couple of side quests to level up and get piloting perks. I did a mission for Walter Stroud and he gave me a ship for free. But there was a problem. The ship was a Class C ship and the game doesn't allow you to pilot those ships without a perks. I had to get rank 3 of piloting to pilot Class B ships, rank 1 of targeting systems perk, and I had an extra perk I used in shield systems. I also upgraded the starter ship with Class B parts. I returned to Masada 3 to face the hunter and the emissary, and this time I was able to beat them. They don't get destroyed, they just run away to the planet. So we follow them on Masada 3. I went the wrong way and jumped into the lake, which is actually toxic and will lower your max health. I was going to continue, but my max health was pretty low, so I just reloaded my save. Remember, this is my first time completing the main quest, so I'm still figuring out things. This time I went the right way and took the bridge. At the bridge, 3 Starborn spawn. I ran up to them because the cutter has no range, and I started to use anti-gravity. For some reason, anti-gravity didn't work on these guys. I'm not sure why. Now that I think about it, is this a feature Bethesda added to the game? Where if you continue to use the same power, the enemies will find a way to counter it, making you use different powers? Maybe? Anyways, I switched to gravity wave, which pushes the enemies away and knocks them down. This fight was chaotic, but I had to take it slow, focus on one enemy at a time, used a ton of med packs, and I used the explosive barrels throughout the bridge. It was a long fight, but everyone eventually died. Inside the facility we had a mini boss fight, where multiple enemies are spawned by a Starborn. These enemies were pretty weak, and this whole mini boss fight was surprisingly easy. I actually checked the difficulty a couple of times to make sure I was on very hard, and I was. The next area of the facility was the same thing, but instead of human enemies, we had to fight robots. I first focused on the turrets, and Dereja went straight to the Starborn, so the Starborn was distracted most of the time while I took out the turrets. Compared to the last couple of missions, this mission is way easier. We are then teleported back to Petro's ship, where we fight his guards. I did my ultimate strategy: take one enemy at a time. The next combat section is the fight with the duplicates. These guys are not hard if you take one at a time. I started to notice that they just kept spawning, so I stopped killing them and just looked for the Starborn and focused on him. We arrive at the final artifact. There is a final persuasion check to let you walk away without confrontation. I got a critical success on the persuasion check. They just surrendered the artifacts and walked away, so I proceeded to get the last artifact. This will teleport us back to the entrance of the facility. At this point, my game had a glitch. I was teleported outside, but the game still said to take the artifact. At first, I didn't know if this was part of the story. I thought it was. I thought this was the end of the game, where each time you grab the artifact, you would be teleported back over and over. You would be stuck in a loop. I went inside again to take the artifact, but the artifact wasn't there. I tried interacting with the marker and nothing happened. I tried using my powers and nothing happened. I tried dropping the artifacts, but the game wouldn't let me drop it because it was marked as a quest item. Now I know this is a glitch and not part of the story. I was going to return back to my ship, but the door was locked. I couldn't leave the room. My only option was to reload a save. I reloaded the previous save and the game fixed itself. Now it was telling me to add the artifacts. I added the artifacts and we went to the Unity. Here I had two options, to accept it or reject it. I decided to reject it in case I wanted to return to this save. I got teleported back to my ship and I had another glitch. I couldn't move or do anything. The only thing I could do was move the camera. I started thinking again, is this part of the game? Is something supposed to happen? So I went on YouTube and watched a random video of someone rejecting the Unity. And I saw they could move. I reloaded my save and tried again, and again I was stuck. I couldn't move. I guess Bethesda really wants me to accept the Unity. I reloaded my save and accepted the Unity. And the game is now finished. So, can you beat Starfield with only a cutter on very hard? I would say yes, if you don't count the space battles forced by the game. And you need to level up your ship for the space battle at Masada 3. I don't think it is possible to win the space battle with a starter ship on very hard. If it is possible, it will be very difficult and will take multiple hours. And that is another challenge completed. See you next time.